Hello everyone and welcome back to Lost Planeswalker. You're here with me, Jesse, the Lost Planeswalker, and today I'm doing a deck upgrade guide for the Deadly Disguise deck from the Murder at Karlov Manor set that just released. This is a very cool commander deck that brings to light two new mechanics from this set, Disguise and Cloak, and really brings back in strength two old mechanics, Morph and Manifest. So let's look at these two commanders and it'll kind of give us a better idea of how this deck is supposed to work. First, we have Kraust, Eyes of the Glade, and Disguise of the Rage Mother. So Kraust is a legendary creature Dryad Detective. With whenever a creature you control that was turned face up this turn deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. And then you can tap it to turn target face down attacking creature you control face up. So this is a pretty cool action because one, we're getting some card draw off of it, and two, whenever you turn that creature up, maybe it's a 2/2, 4/4, 8/8, 13/13. You know, there's a lot of really cool morph cards, especially some with some really big power. And in addition to that, a lot of these cards care about when they turn up. So you're not only getting that extra card draw, but you're getting whatever effect is attached to it. So that is a really cool effect, and that is the main commander of this deck. But the co-commander, and in my opinion, probably the one I would run, because I think it's just strong. Not that Kraust isn't strong, I think it's strong in its own right. Disguise, the Rage Mother, is a legendary creature bear with when the Rage Mother enters a battlefield, draw a card for each creature you control with base power and toughness 2/2. Then, whenever a creature you control with base power and toughness 2/2 attacks, it gets +3/+3 until end of turn. So notably, our other commander here, and every card that you either manifest, morph, cloak, or disguise are 2/2s, meaning that all those cards that you are putting onto the battlefield just become a lot bigger whenever they attack. Now this is only when they attack, which is kind of a bummer because, you know, they still get hit by spells that are going to deal, you know, low amounts of damage to everything. But on attacking, you can kind of turn a board of nothingness into, you know, a pretty decent board. You only need 8 creatures with Disguise on the battlefield to completely knock out a player from 40 life. So that is something really interesting and something to keep in mind. In addition, you're going to be drawing a card for each of those creatures, which is a little cool draw engine, if I do say so myself. So real quickly, let's run through the new cards in this deck, and I'll kind of show you what cards I think are worth cutting and which cards I think you should add. But first off, we have Bolt Bender, Experiment 12, and Panoptic Projector. Bolt Bender, when it turns face up, lets you choose a new target for any number of other spells and abilities, which is quite cool. I think this card could be really fun in a lot of other decks. Experiment 12 is of course a play on Experiment 1, and whenever it or other face-up creatures are turned face up, you put a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to its power. And Panoptic Projector says the next face-down creature spell you cast this turn costs 3 less to cast, meaning that it just is free basically, because all Morph, Manifest, Cloak, and Disguise cost 3 to do so. And then if turning a face down permanent face up causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, it triggers an additional time, which works even better with Experiment 12, meaning you get to double those counters or every other effect that cares when you flip up cards. So that is quite neat. Next we have Proliferator Ooze, Ransom Note, and Show-Stopping Surprise. Proliferator Ooze has Death Touch, and whenever it or another creature you control is turned face up, create a 0/0 green ooze creature token with trample. The token enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is the number of other creatures you control, which is actually a really great card in this deck. It is so great. I can see this being used in other old Morph and Manifest decks as well, just basically getting you double the creatures, especially with trample. And just a quick note, that token is the same token that is used in the Slime Against Humanity card, that you can have as many of them as possible. So that is something interesting to note. Next up, Ransom Note. This is in every deck, but it is a clue that says when it enters, you surveil 1, then you can sack it to either cloak the top card of your library, go to target creature, or draw a card. Pretty great effect, honestly. It'd be cool if this was a new version of a clue token. Maybe the surveil is too strong, or maybe the other options are too strong, but being able to kind of choose from a assortment is quite powerful. And then Show-Stopping Surprise is an instant that says choose target creature you control, turn it face up. If it's face down, then it deals damage equal to its power to each other creature. That is actually pretty cool. You're going to be able to kind of wipe boards and hopefully keep all your stuff on the board. So next up, we have Teska Judith's Hellhound, True Identity, and Unexplained Absence. Teska Judith's Hellhound has Unleash, which means when it enters the battlefield, you have a choice of putting a +1/+1 counter on it, but as long as it does that, it can't block. This also gives all other dogs Unleash, which is quite neat. And the creature control with counters on them have haste. So not only do our stuff get bigger, but they can immediately attack. And then whenever it attacks, we add a red mana for each attacking creature. I can see this as a really cool mono red dog deck that just cares about casting really big spells and be able to create a ton of mana doing so. True Identity says whenever True Identity or another permanent you control is turned face up, scry 1, then draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. This is kind of cool. It's a enchantment, which is really neat, but it's going to let you kind of make a slow engine that's going to give you some advantage over the entire game. And then Unexplained Absence says for each player, exile up to one target non-land permanent that player controls. For each permanent exiled this way, its controller cloaks the top card of their library. So you get to get rid of their best thing, and maybe you're putting something good on the board, but they're still going to have to flip it in order to get that value. And lastly, we have Veiled Ascension, an enchantment that says when Veiled Ascension enters the battlefield, put a flying counter on each face-down creature control. Face-down creatures you control enter the battlefield with a flying counter on them, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you may cloak the top card of your library. This is also, I think, one of the best new cards. It's quite strong. It's going to give, another reason for your opponents to be fearful of all your flipped creatures. And since they flip, they don't exile and come back. They get to keep those counters. So anything you flip up will now just have a flying counter on it as well. But notably, I want to talk about the cards I decided to cut out of this deck first. And really, there was a lot of really, really good stuff in this deck, but I felt like some of the cards they included weren't as good as I would have wanted. They were either big, or something, and maybe your opponents, purposefully did that. Whenever you morph or cloak or disguise a creature out onto the battlefield, you can kind of do that at any point in time, so it kind of can be a surprise, but I just feel like some of the stuff they included in here was just too expensive, and you weren't going to get as much value as you could have out of some of the cheaper stuff. So starting out, we have Achroma Angel of Fury, Ashcloud Phoenix, and Imperial Hellkite. So Achroma Angel of Fury is a awesome angel, can't be countered, has flying trample protection from white and blue, and it also has fire breathing, so you can just make it really big. But my main issue with this card is that in order to morph it, it's a 6 mana 6/6 with flying and trample, which is good. It also has protection from white and blue, which is great. But I just don't know how useful that's gonna be. I mean, yeah, maybe later in the game, it can't be countered, it has all this other stuff. It's really good, but I just wouldn't play this normally, and I just don't think this deck makes that any better. Maybe if you have Kraust as your commander, I could see this as being a really good option, and that's kind of gonna go with the rest of these cards. I kind of went with the more Rage Mother side of the deck, and what I cut is basically based off of that, but I just honestly thought there was a lot better cards you could include in this deck, so that's kind of the direction I took. Same here with Ashcloud Phoenix. When it dies, it returns face down, and then whenever it turns face up, you deal 2 damage to each player. I don't think spending 6 mana every turn to deal 2 damage is worth it, especially because it only has 1 toughness. That means a, lowly white-black spirit is going to be able to kill this thing, and I just think that's a great waste of your mana. And next up, we have Imperial Hellkite, which is a really cool card because its activated ability says whenever it is turned face up, you can search your library for a dragon card, reveal it, put in your hand, then shuffle. Well, the fact that you're paying 8 mana plus an additional 3 to play it face down, so 11 in total to play this, and then just tutor another dragon seems like a great waste of mana, especially in great colors like white and green that have the ability to search for creatures for a single mana. It just seems like a great waste. And honestly, there's only one other dragon, I believe, in the deck anyways, so I don't really know what the point of including this card was other than it's big and flips. But our next 3 cards are Krosan Cloudscraper, Krosan Colossus, and Root Elemental. Again, we see the biggest creatures in this deck that I just don't think are worthwhile. Now, what I mean by that is, yes, they're big. Yes, they're going to be hitting for a lot of damage if you can, get them through. But the likelihood of that happening, I mean, I don't know. None of these have protection, and Krosan Cloudscraper even makes you pay extra just to keep it. So I really just dislike all these big cards, and Root Elemental has the added benefit of when it is turned face up, you may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. I was on the fence. I think 6 mana to get a 6/5 that also does that is pretty good, but it gets more expensive because you have to play it face down, and then you have to pay an additional mana to do so. So I don't know. I mean, it's probably good, but I I don't know, it doesn't give it haste. You know, it just gets something onto the battlefield, and if it's your best thing and you're like, haha, I got it out for nothing, you know, it can just immediately be killed by some spell or who knows what. But lastly, we have Scourge of the Throne and Theolomite Hermit. So Scourge of the Throne is a awesome card that has this dethrone mechanic that says whenever a creature attacks a player with the most life or tied for the most life, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. And then Scourge of the Throne says when it attacks for the first time each turn, if the attacking player has this dethrone, is, you know, has the most life or is tied for the most life, you untap all attacking creatures and there's an additional combat phase, which could be pretty great. But really, I would only care about that if I was being able to generate stuff between combats, if I was able to make a ton of mana so I could do something, and I just don't see that as happening in this deck, the way it's set up. So yeah, you get to double attack and maybe you have some big creatures and, you know, our opponents can't block, but I really don't like it. In addition, this was the only other dragon I believe you could tutor, so what's the point? If you draw this ahead of time or it gets milled, you know, your Imperial Hellkite is just worthless at that point. And the Theolomite Hermit says all saplings get +1/+1. It has morph, and then when it's turned to face up, create 4 1/1 green sapling creature tokens. So essentially, if you pay 8 mana, you get a 1/1 and then 4 2/2s, which isn't bad if you're in a token deck, but not for 8 mana. There's much cheaper ways to do this, and it's just not great because there's no other synergy. And that's kind of the point of most of these cards, is there's no synergy in this deck. They kind of just threw them in because they have morph and they're big or they do something neat, but I just didn't think any of that was worthwhile. So now let's talk about the cards to add, and I really didn't take me much time to figure out what cards were going to be added to this deck because they added a ton of really cool disguise cards or cards that care about, you know, things getting turned face up or whatever. So I thought this was a really easy additions to this deck. Now you may be able to find some other morph and manifest cards and disguise cards or cloak cards I just didn't know about, but I just thought all of these were well worth including. So first off, we have Aurelia's Vindicator, Case of the Locked Hothouse, and Delaney Streetwise Lookout. So Aurelia's Vindicator is awesome. I love it. For 4 mana, you get Flying, Lifelink, Ward 2, 4/2. I think that's not great if it's an angel. You know, I would want an angel to at least be a 4/4, especially for 4 mana. But this isn't why you're playing this card. You're playing this because of its disguise. So it has X, 3, and a white. So you're just paying additional mana to flip this, which is good. You can just pay 3 and a white if you want to play it for its disguise cost, which I like. But when it's turned face up, exile up to X other creatures from the battlefield and or creature cards from graveyard. When it leaves the battlefield, return the exile cards to their owner's hands. So what I find really interesting about this is if you can pay enough mana, you can basically wipe your opponent's board, and yeah, when this dies, they get it all back, but they have to kill this creature also, meaning you can kind of leave their board wide open. Or if you're playing a deck and you want to get a bunch of stuff back from your graveyard, play this, get it all back, get the benefit of this angel, and then either when you kill it or when it dies, you know, you get all that stuff back to your hand. So I think it's a really cool card. Next up, we have Case of the Locked Hothouse. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. To solve, you control 7 or more lands. Then when you're solved, you may look at the top card of your library anytime, and you may play lands and cast creatures and enchantment spells from the top of your library. I think this is probably going to be a pretty awesome card. I don't think it's going to be too hard to solve this card, and just all that benefit of being able to play pretty much anything from the top of your library is pretty great. And then Delaney Streetwise Lookout. This is an all-star card. This is running right around $20, which honestly, it's probably worth it because it says Legendary Creature Human Scout. Creatures you control with power 2 or less can't be blocked by creatures with power 3 or greater. That is awesome. This is perfect for every token deck ever made that has little guys that just want to get through, but it's so hard to get through. And there's only a few other cards in Magic that have this clause that's saying it can't be blocked by greater power, but those aren't white colors, so this is great to see. And then if an ability of a creature you control with power 2 or less triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. Now, not all of the disguise cards, you know, are small, but there are some that are smaller, and their, you know, activated abilities are good when they flip. So being able to get that benefit again is just so worthwhile. Next up, we have Doorkeeper Thrall, Fugitive Codebreaker, and Samala Sentry. Doorkeeper Thrall is another great card that is going to be probably played in a lot of decks, and my favorite thing is a Thrall. It's just such a weird creature type you don't get to see, but for 1 and a white, you get a flash flying creature that says artifacts and creatures entering the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger. This is pretty epic, actually. This is going to be a staple card. It is going to be not nearly as expensive as Delny, but just being able to negate any triggers from creatures or artifacts entering with flash and flying is going to be so versatile and useful. And you should pick up this card not only for this deck, but for any deck that you play white in, basically. This is a staple card if I've ever seen one. Next to that, we have Fugitive Codebreaker, that is prowess and haste. And what I love about this disguise ability is that it costs 1 less for each instant sorcery card in your graveyard. So essentially, 4 mana total, but you get a 2/1 with prowess and haste, and then when it's turned faced up, you can draw 3 cards. You do have to discard your hand, but you'll probably do this when you don't have anything good in it anyways. And this is perfect with Delny because you get to do that twice. So maybe not perfect because I think you have to discard the cards that you just drew, but it's a cool effect and you can see how it's already useful. And then Sumala Sentry is a elf archer with reach, and whenever a face down permanent you control is turned face up, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and then a +1/+1 counter on this card. And obviously, Denly again, same thing. You get to put 2 counters on this and 2 counters on whatever's flipped. And then lastly, we have Tin Street Gossip and Yaris Roar of the Old Gods. Tin Street Gossip is a creature Viashino Advisor with Vigilance, and you can tap it to add a red and a green. Spend this mana only to cast face down spells or to turn creatures face up. This is just a kind of unique mana dork to morph, manifest, disguise, and cloak cards, trying to turn things face up, and you get some extra mana to do so. So this is a cool card that can help ramp you into casting some of your bigger morph, manifest, disguise, or cloaked cards. And then Yaris, Roar of the Old Gods, one of my favorite creatures, and I'm so glad I got to include him in one of these decks. But other creatures you control have haste. Whenever 1 or more face-down creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you draw a card. Then, whenever a face-down creature you control dies, return it to the battlefield face-down under its owner's control if it's a permanent card, then turn it face-up. This is such a cool effect. Basically you're either forcing your opponents to take damage or flip your creatures for free. You could build a whole deck just based around this card alone, and I think it would be probably just as powerful or maybe even stronger as your other commanders for this deck. Now, this has the benefit, you'd have to protect this. This has no protection on it, so I would really, feel afraid my opponents would just remove this, but this is such a cool card, and I really, really love it. But those are the cards that I decided to cut and add and show off, so please tell me down below, what do you think? Leave that in the comments. Was there a card I included that you said, I've never heard of this? Or did you like that all the cards I included were just from this new set? Because I think they're so good they should get used. I thought this was a really great idea to bring back the morph and manifest keywords in a new light and just give them some additional, beefiness with that ward too. And I'm very excited to see, more cards on the battlefield. I'm always excited when I see something I haven't seen before or you see very few times. So this is a very cool deck, and I hope you enjoyed. If you want to help me out, please consider subscribing to my channel, sharing this video with a friend, hitting that like button, and just, paying attention. This entire week is all full of Murder at Karlov Manor deck upgrade guides, so whether this is the first video you've ever seen or not, check out those other ones to see what I suggest. But I just want to say thank you so much, and let's see today's Scryfall card of the day with Deflection. Up and down, over and through, back around, the joke's on you. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you later, Planeswalkers.